The afternoon light cast long shadows across the marble floor of Chicago's most prestigious financial institution. 12-year-old Amara Washington sat in the gilded waiting area, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, her dark eyes taking in everything. The polished chrome fixtures gleamed under crystal chandeliers, while men in $1,000 suits moved across the space like sharks in expensive fabric. Her grandmother, Odessa, shifted uncomfortably beside her, arthritic fingers gripping a plastic folder containing 30 years of savings statements. Amara's worn sneakers barely touched the ground as she swung her legs slowly, observing. She noticed how the bank employees smiled differently at people, bright and welcoming for those with Rolex watches and designer handbags, polite but distant for others. The way security guards' eyes lingered on certain visitors. The hushed conversations at marble desks that seemed to follow patterns she was only beginning to understand. The mahogany walls bore portraits of stern-faced men, their eyes seeming to watch every transaction. Everything about this place whispered power, control, and the kind of authority that could crush dreams with the stroke of a pen. But Amara wasn't intimidated. She was curious. Her scientific mind, already far beyond her years, catalogued every detail-like evidence in an experiment she hadn't yet realized she was conducting. Across the vast lobby, a man in a charcoal suit emerged from a private office, his smile too wide, his movements too calculated. He approached an elderly woman near the loan department, speaking in honeyed tones that made Amara's stomach tighten, with instinctual warning. The second complication arrived in the form of Marcus Sterling, the man in the charcoal suit who'd caught Amara's attention. His business card read, Senior Investment Advisor, but his methods were anything but advisory. As he approached senior customers one by one, Amara watched him guide them into private consultation rooms with the skill of a predator separating prey from the herd. Each person emerged looking confused, clutching thick documents they clearly didn't understand. Some left with tears barely held back. Others shook their heads, muttering about complicated terms and necessary procedures. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone paying attention, which unfortunately seemed to be only Amara. Mrs. Thompson will help you now, a teller announced, gesturing toward Grandma Odessa. They shuffled forward, Amara's hand protectively touching her grandmother's arm. As they walked past one of Sterling's consultation rooms, she heard fragments of conversation through the slightly open door. Additional fees for your protection. Government regulations require. Sign here and here. Sterling's voice was smooth as silk, but something in his cadence reminded Amara of the way her teacher spoke when explaining why homework was for your own good. Technically, true, but missing crucial context. She slowed her pace, straining to hear more, her grandmother gently pulling her forward. The teller, Mrs. Thompson, was a middle-aged black woman whose genuine smile was the first real one Amara had seen since entering the bank. How can I help you today, Mrs. Washington? Need to make a withdrawal, Grandma Odessa said, sliding her savings book across the mahogany counter, for my medical expenses. As Mrs. Thompson processed the transaction, her expression shifted. She glanced at the computer screen, then back at the old woman, her eyebrows knitting together in concern. I'm sorry, Mrs. Washington, but there seems to be an issue with your account. The room tilted slightly for Amara. Everything felt wrong. The way Mrs. Thompson's hands hesitated over the keyboard, the way Grandma Odessa's grip tightened on her cane, the way Sterling's voice carried just a bit too loudly from the consultation room behind them. What kind of issue? Grandma Odessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Mrs. Thompson could answer, Sterling appeared at their side, that practiced smile stretching across his face like a crack in expensive veneer. Mrs. Washington! What a coincidence. I was just thinking we should discuss your portfolio optimization. The word optimization hung in the air like a threat wrapped in silk. The consultation room smelled of leather and lies. Sterling had guided them there with the efficiency of someone who'd done this countless times before, his hand hovering just above Grandma Odessa's elbow without quite touching, respectful on the surface, controlling underneath. The mahogany desk between them bore stacks of documents, each page dense with legal jargon and fine print that seemed to writhe like living things under the fluorescent lights. Sterling's pen clicked rhythmically, as he explained how Grandma Odessa's simple savings account was underperforming and needed to be restructured for maximum benefit. Amara sat silent in the corner chair, her small hands gripping its leather arms as she watched her grandmother's face grow increasingly confused. Each document Sterling presented contained more complex terms, more signatures required, more immediate action needed to protect her grandmother's lifelong savings. "This form transfers your funds to our premier investment vehicle," Sterling explained, sliding another set of papers toward Grandma Odessa. "It's fully backed by our institution's guarantee of satisfaction." But Amara caught the word uninsured, buried in paragraph 7 of page 4. She saw the fee structure hidden in the appendix, charges that would drain the account within months. Most importantly, she saw the subtle shift in Sterling's posture whenever her grandmother asked questions, the way his smile tightened when Grandma Odessa hesitated. "I don't understand all these forms," Grandma Odessa admitted, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd trusted too many people with too many important things throughout her life. "That's perfectly normal," Sterling assured her, his tone gentle but his eyes calculating. "That's why I'm here to guide you through this. Your granddaughter seems like a bright girl. I'm sure she'd want you to make the smart financial choice, wouldn't you, sweetheart?" Amara met his gaze steadily. She saw through every word, every gesture, every calculated pause, but she remained silent, remembering her grandmother's warnings about speaking up in adult conversations, especially in places like this where their voices mattered less than others. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Then Sterling reached for his pen, extending it toward Grandma Odessa with the finality of a judge's gavel. But before Grandma Odessa could take it, the door burst open. The door slammed against the wall with a crack that silenced the entire floor. In walked Mrs. Lillian Jefferson, a 90-year-old woman who'd been wheeled in by her granddaughter, but now stood on trembling legs, her walker abandoned at the threshold. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts but burning with fury, locked onto Sterling. "You lying son of a—" she began, then caught herself remembering her upbringing. "Mr. Sterling, we need to talk, right now." The atmosphere in the room shifted like air pressure before a storm. Sterling's professional composure flickered, just for a second, before reassembling itself with visible effort. "Mrs. Jefferson, I'm currently with another client. If you'd like to schedule an appointment—" "I don't need an appointment." "To discuss how you stole $50,000 from my retirement fund." Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd taught high school mathematics for 45 years and wouldn't be easily confused by financial sleight of hand. Amara watched the exchange with growing understanding. The elderly woman's presence wasn't accidental. It was exactly what they needed. Someone who could speak what they'd all been thinking but couldn't prove. "There must be some misunderstanding," Sterling said, but his hand retreated the pen. "Your investment is simply transitioning to a more secure—" "Secure," Mrs. Jefferson laughed bitterly. "You might have fooled me with your fancy papers, but my granddaughter is studying law at Northwestern. She read every word of that contract you pushed on me." Grandma Odessa looked between the two of them, her confusion deepening but her instinct for trouble sharpening. "Amara," she whispered, "come take my arm, baby. I think we need to leave." But Amara didn't move. She was processing everything. The patterns, the behavior, the proof that was right in front of them if anyone cared to look. The pieces were falling into place with the clarity of a perfectly solved equation. As Sterling began to escort Mrs. Jefferson out, probably to a more private location where her accusations could be contained, Amara made her choice. She stood up, her voice small, but carrying clearly in the tension-filled room. "Grandma, don't sign anything. Not yet." What happened next would change everything, for Amara, for her grandmother, and for every person who'd ever been made to feel small in a room full of power suits and false promises. The next 3 days passed in a blur of consequences Amara never could have imagined. The bank's response was swift and overwhelming, like watching an army mobilize against a single small voice. First came the formal complaint letter, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic as he handed it to Amara's father, Robert. The thick envelope contained accusations of disrupting business operations, interfering with legal proceedings, and causing emotional distress to staff members. The bank's lawyers had moved quickly, painting a 12-year-old girl as a troublemaker who'd turned a simple misunderstanding into a public scene. Then came the phone calls. Reporters from the business section of the Chicago Tribune called their apartment at all hours, wanting to get the other side of the story about the child who'd caused chaos at Platinum Bank. Most treated it as a curiosity piece, a smart kid who'd misunderstood adult business, but their questions felt like accusations disguised as interest. Amara's parents took turns fielding the calls, their voices growing tighter with each conversation. Her mother, Sarah, worked night shifts as a nurse and now came home to find journalists camped outside their apartment building. Her father's janitorial job at the local high school became a source of daily humiliation as co-workers whispered about Robert's daughter and her bank trouble. But the worst was watching her grandmother. Grandma Odessa sat in her rocking chair by the window, staring out at the street but seeing nothing. She'd barely touched her food since that day at the bank, and the medication bottles on her side table seemed to multiply daily. Pills for anxiety, pills for her heart, pills to help her sleep through the guilt. "This is my fault," she murmured whenever she thought no one was listening. "I should have just signed those papers. Now look what I've done to my family." Amara tried to tell her about the patterns she'd seen, about how Sterling's behavior matched classic predatory practices she'd read about in her advanced placement research projects. But adult words felt inadequate for what she knew in her bones to be true. On the fourth day, as news vans still occasionally prowled their neighborhood like mechanical vultures, Amara found her answer in the most unexpected place: the laptop of her cousin Marcus, who was home from college and letting her use it for homework. Late at night, while everyone else slept, she navigated past her schoolwork and began researching everything she could find about financial fraud, elderly exploitation, and the Platinum Bank itself. What she discovered made her stomach drop and her heart race with equal measure. The bank had been investigated twice in the past decade for similar practices. Both times, the investigations had been quietly settled out of court. The patterns Sterling used weren't unique. They were part of a systematic approach that several former employees had tried to expose before disappearing into confidential settlements and non-disclosure agreements. But most importantly, she found that there was a way to fight back if they had evidence. As dawn broke over Chicago, Amara printed out pages of regulations, precedents, and contact information for financial advocacy groups. She wasn't just a 12-year-old girl anymore. She was becoming someone who understood exactly how the system worked, and more importantly, how it could be challenged. The turning point came disguised as an ordinary Tuesday morning. Amara had skipped breakfast, her stomach too knotted with anxiety to accept food. The media attention was finally dying down, but the damage felt permanent. Her family moved differently now, like people walking on ice, waiting for the next crack to appear. She was walking to school when she heard her name called from behind. Turning, she saw Mrs. Jefferson leaning heavily on her walker at the bus stop, her granddaughter Jasmine nearby. "Amara, honey, come here for a minute." As she approached, Mrs. Jefferson reached into her purse with trembling hands and pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind students use to record lectures. "I've been carrying this thing for years," she said quietly. "Old habit from my teaching days. I never trusted my memory for important conversations, so I'd record everything. Parent conferences, faculty meetings, even appointments like the one at the bank." Amara felt something electric shoot through her spine. "You recorded what happened with Mr. Sterling?" "Every word," Mrs. Jefferson confirmed. "And after what happened to you, seeing how they tried to turn a child into the villain, I knew I had to do something." Jasmine stepped forward, her law school confidence evident in her posture. "We've already had the recording authenticated and transcribed. Sterling's voice is clear throughout. He admits to several practices that violate federal banking regulations." The small device in Mrs. Jefferson's aged hands suddenly seemed to weigh more than all the legal documents the bank had threatened them with combined. This was evidence, real undeniable proof of exactly what Amara had tried to tell everyone. "But why are you giving this to me?" Amara asked. Mrs. Jefferson smiled, and for the first time since this ordeal began, someone looked at Amara not as a child who'd caused trouble, but as a person who'd told the truth when it mattered most. "Because you were the only one brave enough to speak up when it counted," she said. "Because your voice gave other people permission to find theirs. And because sometimes the youngest person in the room sees clearly what everyone else chooses to ignore." Jasmine handed Amara a business card. "There's a legal aid attorney named Pedro Ramos. He specializes in financial fraud cases, and after hearing about your situation, he's offered to take your family's case pro bono." The bus arrived, but Mrs. Jefferson didn't move to board it. Instead, she pressed the recorder into Amara's hands with the solemnity of someone passing on a sacred trust. "You started something that day, child. Now let's finish it." Pedro Ramos's office was everything Platinum Bank wasn't: cramped, cluttered, and utterly without pretense. Legal books towered in unstable stacks, case files spilled across every surface, and the coffee maker looked like it had been brewing caffeine since the Carter administration. But his eyes, sharp and kind behind wire-rimmed glasses, held the kind of intensity that made Amara feel understood for the first time since this nightmare began. "Tell me everything," he said simply, setting up his own recorder. "From the beginning." So she did. Amara described every detail: the way Sterling approached elderly customers, the patterns in his language, the documentation she'd analyzed, the fine print she'd deciphered. Her parents flanked her, occasionally adding details or corrections, but mostly listening in amazement as their 12-year-old daughter demonstrated a grasp of financial law that left the attorney nodding with increasing respect. "You've built a stronger preliminary case than most first-year law students could manage," Pedro admitted after she finished. "But I need you to understand, the bank will fight this with everything they have. They'll try to discredit you, to make this about a child who misunderstood adult business." Amara met his gaze steadily. "Let them try. Mrs. Jefferson's recording proves I understood perfectly." The next weeks became a whirlwind of preparation. Pedro introduced them to other victims, elderly people who'd lost thousands to Sterling's schemes but had been too embarrassed to speak out. Each story strengthened their case, weaving a web of evidence that became harder to dismiss with each new thread. Amara spent hours with Pedro, helping him understand the technical aspects of the fraud, explaining how the contractual language was designed to confuse, showing him the mathematical impossibilities built into the investment structures Sterling promoted. But the bank didn't sit quietly. Private investigators appeared in their neighborhood, asking questions about the Washington family's financial history, their personal lives, anything that could be used to undermine their credibility. The school recommended Amara for psychological evaluation, claiming she was showing signs of stress-induced paranoid thinking. Through it all, Grandma Odessa remained Amara's anchor. The old woman's initial guilt had crystallized into something harder and more valuable: resolve. "They picked the wrong family to mess with," she declared one evening, watching Amara pore over legal documents with a dedication that would have made her graduate student cousins proud. "They thought they could silence us because we're not rich, because we're not white, because you're just a child. But they forgot something important." "What's that, Grandma?" "Truth doesn't need money or power to be true. It just needs someone willing to speak it no matter the cost." As the court date approached, Amara felt the weight of every person who'd been victimized by predatory practices like Sterling's. She thought of all the elderly people who'd signed documents they didn't understand, trusting in systems that weren't designed to protect them. The courthouse steps seemed impossibly steep that morning, each one carrying them higher into a battle that would determine not just their family's future, but the future of countless others who'd been silenced by shame, manipulation, and the assumption that their voices didn't matter. But Amara climbed each step with growing confidence. She had the truth, she had evidence, and most importantly, she had learned something that Sterling and his bank had underestimated. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the most powerful message. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a situation where institutions tried to silence someone for speaking out against injustice? Share your thoughts in the comments. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as journalists, activists, and curious citizens filled every available seat. Amara sat between her parents, her small hands folded in her lap, wearing her best dress, a navy blue outfit her mother had borrowed from a neighbor because their own resources had been stretched thin by legal fees and lost wages. Across the aisle, the bank's legal team looked like an army in matching dark suits, their briefcases gleaming with the kind of polish that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Sterling sat among them, his confidence apparently unshaken, occasionally whispering to the attorneys who flanked him like bodyguards. Judge Maria Reyes, a Latina woman in her 50s who'd built her career on consumer protection cases, called the court to order. As she surveyed the packed courtroom, her eyes briefly met Amara's, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared experience perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement that they were part of something larger than individual grievances. Pedro rose for his opening statement, his voice carrying the weight of every victim they'd uncovered. "Your Honor, this case is about a systematic pattern of predatory practices designed to exploit the elderly, the vulnerable, and anyone who dares to question the actions of a powerful institution." He gestured toward Amara. 12-year-old Amara Washington did something remarkable. She saw through the manipulation and spoke out. For that courage, she and her family have been subjected to harassment, intimidation, and attempts to destroy their reputation. The bank's chief attorney, a silver-haired man named Jonathan Blackwood, countered with practiced smoothness. "Your Honor, what we have here is a child who misunderstood adult financial proceedings and created a disturbing scene based on incomplete information. Our client, Mr. Sterling, is a respected member of the financial community with 15 years of exemplary service." As the depositions began, Amara watched the dance of legal proceedings unfold. Each witness told their story: elderly victims who'd lost savings, former bank employees who'd witnessed Sterling's methods, financial experts who explained how the complex documents were designed to mislead. But Amara knew the real turning point would come when she took the stand. When her name was called, the courtroom fell silent. The short walk to the witness stand felt like crossing a vast desert, each step carrying her farther from childhood and closer to something she couldn't yet name. After taking the oath, she faced the packed courtroom. In the front row, Grandma Odessa gave her an encouraging nod. Her parents held hands tightly. Mrs. Jefferson sat with dignity, the recorder that started everything visible in her lap like a talisman. Pedro approached with gentle confidence. "Amara, can you tell the court what you observed at Platinum Bank on the day in question?" She began slowly, her voice quiet but clear. As she spoke, describing the patterns she'd noticed, the inconsistencies in the documents, the way Sterling manipulated elderly customers with false urgency and fear tactics, something remarkable happened. Her voice grew stronger, more confident. The 12-year-old girl transformed before everyone's eyes into someone who understood injustice, with a clarity that made adults shift uncomfortably in their seats. He wasn't helping anyone, she concluded. He was hunting. And he thought, no one would notice because children aren't supposed to understand money, and elderly people are supposed to trust banks, and families like mine aren't supposed to fight back. The cross-examination was brutal. Blackwood tried everything, challenging her age, questioning her understanding, suggesting she'd been coached by her parents or the attorneys. But Amara never wavered. She answered each question with the same quiet certainty that had first made Sterling nervous in that consultation room. Finally, Blackwood played what he clearly thought was his trump card. "Miss Washington," he said with condescending sympathy, "isn't it possible that you simply misunderstood what you witnessed, that you've been influenced by adults who are angry about their financial decisions?" Amara looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every conversation she'd overheard, every tear she'd seen her grandmother cry, every time her parents had hugged her a little, too tightly while whispering that everything would be okay. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "I'm 12 years old. I'm not too young to recognize when someone is lying. I'm not too young to understand that stealing is wrong, even when it's done with expensive paper and big words. And I'm definitely not too young to speak up when I see someone hurting my grandmother." The silence that followed was profound. Then, almost without thinking, Mrs. Jefferson began to clap. Slowly, other people joined her, The journalists, the activists, the other victims. Even some of the court officers were nodding with approval. Judge Reyes called for order, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely displeased with the disruption. The trial continued for 2 more days, but everyone knew the real verdict had been delivered in that moment when a 12-year-old girl had spoken truth to power and refused to be diminished by it. When Judge Reyes delivered her final ruling, finding in favor of the plaintiffs and ordering significant damages, Amara felt something settle inside her. Not victory exactly, but the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes justice was possible. As they left the courthouse, reporters surrounded them with questions, but Amara only wanted to talk to one person. She approached the microphone that had been set up on the courthouse steps, her family behind her, the crowd of supporters spreading out like ripples in a pond. "My name is Amara Washington," she began, her voice steady and sure. "I'm 12 years old and I speak up because silence allows injustice to grow. Today proved that truth doesn't require power or privilege. It just requires someone willing to say it out loud." She paused, looking out at the crowd of faces, some familiar, some strange, all listening. "If you see something wrong, speak up. It doesn't matter if you're 12 or 92. It doesn't matter if you're scared or if people try to silence you. Truth has its own power and justice has its own strength." The applause was thunderous, but what Amara remembered most was the feeling of her grandmother's hand squeezing hers and the certainty that some battles, no matter how difficult, were worth fighting. Epilogue. 5 years after the trial, Amara received a full scholarship to study business ethics at Northwestern University. She keeps in touch with Pedro Ramos, who now specializes in cases involving young whistleblowers. Mrs. Jefferson, at 95, still attends community meetings about financial literacy for seniors. The Platinum Bank paid millions in fines and restructured their practices. Sterling was barred from working in financial services, but more importantly, dozens of elderly victims received compensation that allowed them to live with dignity in their final years. Grandma Odessa lived to see Amara graduate high school as valedictorian. At the ceremony, she whispered in her granddaughter's ear, "You found your voice, baby. Now help others find theirs." On the wall of the Washington family's apartment hangs a framed photograph from the courthouse steps, Amara at the microphone, her voice raised in defiance of every system that tried to silence her. Beside it is a small plaque with words she's carried forward into every aspect of her life. Truth has its own power. Sometimes change comes not from those who hold the most authority, but from those who hold the most truth. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the loudest message. And sometimes a 12-year-old girl with scuffed shoes and an unshakable moral compass can topple giants built on foundations of lies. You are amazing. If you genuinely enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. It's a great feedback for me. If it made you feel seen, heard, or simply reminded you that change is still possible, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. See you.